Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the unstoppable Michael Milton.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. Most of you, the first thing you probably notice as I get up on stage is the fact that I've got one leg. It doesn't take a genius to work it out. And I want to talk a little bit about my disability today because if I said to you tomorrow you're going to lose a leg, you'd very naturally start to look at the negative sides of it, the bad parts, how it's going to change your life, how it might make some things you do harder, how it might make some things you do not possible. But I want to turn that around a little bit today and have a what are the good parts about disability. After living with one leg for Sorry, Tim, I'll get that going in a second. After living with one leg now for around 35 years, I consider myself a bit of a world expert in one-leggedness. And I have a pretty good understanding that there are negatives to having one leg. But I also believe there's balance in everything in life, and I believe there are also many positives to having a disability. There's the simple and obvious things, the rockstar parking you get out the front of every building in the country, being able, when you travel, not to have to carry pairs of shoes, which for a shoe addict like myself usually means I get double the selection in the same space in my bag. And even the weird little things, the unique sexual positions you can get into without another leg in the way. But that's a whole nother half-hour presentation and is very dependent on your disability, but also your partner's. Anyway, let's leave that one alone for the moment. But perhaps the biggest and the best part about having a disability is what it can teach you. And that's what I want to share a reasonable part of my presentation with you today. What can you learn from having disability? What have I learned from having disability? What can I share with you in terms of learning? So a little bit of background on me. I grew up and went to school in Canberra, and I don't think it was in the intro, but I had bone cancer in my left leg when I was 9 years of age. And it was a pretty tough time for my entire family. I remember very few parts about my cancer treatment. I guess it's a part of what our mind does naturally. Delete the very worst parts of our life because, you don't really need to remember those bad parts. But there are a few key moments that I remember during my childhood cancer journey, which I remember really, really strongly. Perhaps some from my own memory, but also some from family telling stories and those sorts of, revisions of your own memory. And one of the parts of my cancer treatment that I remember very, very strongly was a meeting that we had during the very first part of my treatment. Unfortunately, when I was diagnosed, there was no treatment options for me in Canberra. So I remember I got an X-ray one evening. They knew it was pretty serious. The very next morning, my parents and family and I jumped in the car, drove to Sydney. And the next day, I found myself on the operating table with them cutting my leg open to take a biopsy sample of the cancer to find out exactly what I had. And this meeting happened when we got the results of the biopsy. And they sat my parents and I down in a doctor's office. The oncologist was there. There was a psychiatrist there to help communicate and try and give us a good understanding of what was going on. And they said, okay, Michael, you've got a thing called an osteogenic sarcoma. It's an aggressive form of bone cancer. And you've got about a 1 in 3 chance of survival. But your best chance of survival lies in the combination of 2 treatments. The first one of those is chemotherapy, which they described to me as a 9-year-old as being something a little bit like snake poison. They're going to inject it into my body. It's going to make me really feel pretty sick. It's going to mean that during the chemotherapy cycle, I'll be unable to eat very much. I'll just be too sick. And that the chemotherapy cycle would work on a kind of a 6-week cycle. I'd have a week in hospital with the chemotherapy going into a drip. I'd have another week in hospital to recover from that. And then I'd have about 4 weeks at home where they would monitor my white cell count, give me a couple of blood tests a week until I thought I was healthy enough to go through the next cycle. And over the space of about 2 years, I went through 13 cycles of chemo, each one a little bit harder and a little bit starting from a lower point in terms of your own health and energy levels than the last. So it was a pretty tough time for me. But as during any time in life, there's always the funny times, the fun that you still have, even though you might be pretty sick, even though you're going through a tough time in life. And I remember one of the few days that I actually got to school during this chemotherapy treatment. It was after the second or third cycle, and my mum would always push me pretty hard to go to school. Sometimes I wouldn't arrive till lunchtime if I'm feeling sick in the morning, but she'd always love to get me to school at least a couple of days a week, partly for me to see my friends and have a normal life, partly to give her a break from looking after me. And I remember one day at school, being in the school playground, and I'm watching all my friends play soccer. My left leg's in a cast, I'm walking around on crutches, and as I'm watching my mates play soccer, for some reason my head's needed a scratch. And as I've scratched my head and pulled my fingers away, I felt a few strands of hair in my fingers. And I've remembered that the doctors have told me that one of the side effects of chemotherapy is that your hair's going to fall out. So you can imagine what a 9-year-old boy does when his own hair starts to fall out. You grab a big handful and you go rip. And you go, wow, that didn't even hurt. And then you look up at this handful of hair and go, oh, how cool is this? And the school playground is actually the perfect place for this to happen because you almost get to share this experience with your peers. I remember walking up to every group of kids I could find, didn't matter if they were in my year or another year, I go, hey fellas, bet you're not tough enough to do this. Rip. And there's a bunch of other 9-year-olds going, oh, how do you do that? It hurts too much. I thought I was king of the kids for at least 10 minutes. And then the school bell's gone and it's time to go back into the classroom. And as I've headed back to the classroom, I need to go to the bathroom. And as I've walked into the bathroom, I've looked in the mirror and seen my own head. And you can imagine what I looked like after I'd literally been ripping my own hair out for 10 minutes. That afternoon, Mum shaved my head and I was bald for the next couple of years. In many ways, though, that's a good thing, especially now as I'm past the age of 40, my hair's thinning again and balding. At least I know I've been bald before. And I really know it's not that bad. So the rest of this meeting, they said, okay, so chemotherapy is your first form of treatment, and it's going to have an effect on you for the rest of your life. It's going to mean that your hair's going to fall out, but that'll grow back and that'll be fine. It's going to mean that things like your hearing might work at a slightly different level for the rest of your life. It's going to have some long-term side effects. For example, one of the weird, bizarre side effects of chemotherapy is that it degrades your reflexes. So when you tap on my knee, I have no reflex in my knee or ankle or arms. And the further away from the centre of your body, the less my reflexes actually work at all. And then they said, okay, chemotherapy has a good chance of stopping the cancer spreading around your body, but we simply can't stop this cancer where it started. And so we're going to have to amputate your left leg above the knee. I'd like to think I performed pretty well in this meeting because I didn't go crazy and go, no, you can't cut my leg off. I kind of took their argument when they gave me the choice and said, you can die or you can lose your leg. It's a pretty simple choice. And as a 9-year-old, I was able to move on from that pretty quickly. And most of the questions that I asked in this meeting to the doctors were all about, well, okay, so this next 2 years of my life is going to be a write-off and I'm going to come out of it with one leg. What's life going to be like with one leg? What will I be able to do? What won't I be able to do? And one of the very first questions I asked was, will I still be able to go skiing? You see, skiing was something that was pretty important in my family. It probably started in the late 1960s when my parents got into skiing and they actually decided to go on their honeymoon on a skiing holiday. They got married in the late 1960s in the winter. They went down to a small ski resort of Guthaga for their holiday, and the worst possible thing happened on this ski holiday because it snowed so much that the resort was closed for 3 days. Imagine that, going on your honeymoon and being stuck in your hotel room with nothing to do. Maybe that's where my family's passion for the sport of skiing really started. And somehow the passion that was developed on that honeymoon transferred to both my sister and I into a lifelong love of the sport of skiing. Of course, the doctors couldn't answer that question, and I was very lucky that my parents, who actually started a ski shop, a retail ski business the year I was born, through their contacts in the ski industry, a week later, they got a VHS tape in the mail of a guy on one leg skiing, and I had my question answered. And all through the worst times of my chemotherapy treatment, when I was at my sickest, unable to eat, zero energy, couldn't even get out of bed to go to the bathroom, I'd ask my mum to stick the skiing tape on, and I would watch this guy skiing down the mountain and then close my eyes and go off into my own little dreamland and imagine myself skiing down a mountain. In many ways, I credit that video with helping me be one of the lucky 1 in 3 who did survive, because it gave me a dream. It gave me something to look forward to. And certainly there was a lot of anticipation in mine and my family's life as the winter came after my treatment had finished. And my dad and I went to Thredbo, drove up there. I had a ski instructor to myself who took one ski off and taught me how to ski. And I must have shown a little bit of talent from the very start, because by the end of the first day skiing, I was riding a T-bar up by myself and skiing down the mountain by myself. And the feelings of wind blowing through my hair, all of the feelings of frustration that I experienced in the school playground by not being able to keep up with my peers, not being able to run as fast as they did, not having that same feeling of freedom and speed that young children get from running around a playground. All of those feelings came to me when I was skiing. I could go as fast as I wanted. I was free. I could go wherever I wanted and do whatever I wanted to do. And for me, that really cemented the lifelong love of the sport of skiing and that passion, which still drives me down to the snowy mountains every year to this day, and that I love sharing with my own children. And so that passion for skiing, and I guess the process of learning to ski, of working things out. And it went back to that very original meeting in the hospital when I said, what will I be able to do? What won't I be able to do? And throughout the years, particularly during high school, of learning to adapt and learning to live with one leg, I guess in many ways as human beings, we generally learn how to do things by copying other people. Original thought, doing things in a new way, is one of the hardest possible things for us. And it starts in a school environment. If I was a school teacher and I actually went to university to be a school teacher, and I remember one of the very first things they said to us in Phys Ed 101 was that if you want to teach a group of students anything, the very first step in doing that was to get out in front of them and demonstrate what you wanted them to achieve, so they could start to get a picture of what they were trying to do and basically copy you. That's what teaching is in a large extent. Sure, the kids need to do it themselves. They need to develop the motor patterns. They need to learn and refine that skill. But at a basic level, we have screens or chalkboards or whiteboards or a whole pile of evolution of different things for teachers to demonstrate to groups of kids. And from school onwards, generally, that's how we learn to do things at a basic level. And the best part, and we started talking about the good parts about disability, the best part about having one leg is the fact that I come to problems on a daily basis where I can't copy others. I live in an environment where I simply can't take the way somebody with two legs does something and copy it. I live in an environment where I've got to approach a task with a problem-solving mentality to work out my own unique solution to that task. And it's something that happens very organic, very naturally. One of the very first things I did after leaving hospital with one leg was go to a supermarket with my mum. And I remember this trip to the supermarket because I decided this day, for some unknown reason, instead of bugging her to buy me lollies, I'd actually try and help, and I'd push the shopping trolley. But whereas most kids at the age of 3 or 4 might go to the shopping trolley, might go to a big hardware store where they have those mini trolleys, you look at somebody else how to push a shopping trolley and you go, well, you grab the handle here, you grab the handle here, and you start to push it. It's pretty simple. But when you've got to find your own solution to that problem, it teaches you to think in a different way. I remember on that very first trip to the supermarket, I worked out it was possible to hold a crutch in just one finger. And the crutches are about the right height to hook a finger over the steering bar of the shopping trolley. And a combination of steering it with my fingers, bumping it forward with my hips, was a pretty effective solution to pushing a shopping trolley. But of course, problems in life become a lot more complex than just pushing a shopping trolley. One of the biggest problems I came to as a skier was how to carry all my ski gear from the car to the bottom of the lift. Now, most of you who are not skiers might recognise the two-legged version of how to carry a pair of skis from 1970s James Bond films. You throw them over your shoulder, put your arm on top, you might have a pair of poles in this hand, you might walk along carrying your skis. Unfortunately, that doesn't work too well when you're walking with crutches. But one of the most interesting parts about this problem happens when you go to your first international ski race. Because all of a sudden, you see a range of people with a very similar disability, and you see a range of different solutions to the same problem. Some people outsource it, never find their own unique solution. Get somebody else to do it. It might be their mum, it might be their coach, it might be somebody else. I know it's a pretty good feeling at the end of the day skiing to stop next to somebody who you know is holding their skis, waiting for somebody else to carry for them. Say good day, pick up your own skis and carry them and walk away. That feeling of independence is a huge motivator for me. I don't want other people to do jobs for me. I want to develop the skills to do them myself. Some people will walk with a prosthetic leg. And it's always pretty interesting watching these guys because there's a few adaptations they need to make to carry their skis with a prosthetic leg. They walk up to the bottom of the ski lift and there's a ski rack at the bottom of every ski lift in the world. So they've got their prosthetic leg on, they put their skis in the rack, they bend down, take their leg off, stick it in the rack next to their skis. Now, of course, you don't want this big, long pair of pants flying out behind you while you're skiing all day, so they cut that off, but you also don't want a hole in your ski pants, because if you do have a crash, snow might go where snow really should not ever go. So they've got a special zip that they close the hole in their pants, go skiing for the day. I've always loved watching these guys at the end of the day, because they come down, they stop next to their leg in the ski rack, they pick it up, brush any snow out of the inside of it, and then you see this really interesting facial expression as they put this minus 20-degree plastic socket over their thigh. I remember the feeling because when I used to wear a prosthetic leg a lot when I was a kid, living in Canberra in the winter, pretty cold, I used to I'd leave my pants and my shoe on my leg, and I'd put my leg in my pants, I'd put my shoe on my right foot, and then I'd hop carrying my leg to the bathroom where I'd borrow my sister's hairdryer for a little pre-warming before I had to put a cold leg on in the morning. I don't know how many of you have ever put a cold leg on in the morning, but it's not a pleasant experience. Some other people might carry a strap in their pocket, hook the strap over the tip and tail of the skis so they can hang it under their shoulder and walk along with a pair of skis. My solution when I was about 13 years of age, I believe, was original, new and different. As a 13-year-old, I decided that if the two-legged version of carrying a pair of skis looked like this, then the one-legged version should simply be to put them over your shoulder and under your chin and to work out the balance to carry a pair of skis under your chin. It's a solution that I still use to this day, a solution that I'm flattered other athletes have copied. In the end, having a disability for me It's not about not doing things. It's about working out how you can do them. And by doing this on a daily basis, you develop some really high-level problem-solving skills that, in the end, are really transferable to different parts of your life. I know that if I'm sitting around a table with a group of people, whether it be in a social situation or a more formal work situation, that I will be able to look at the problem we're facing in a different way to everybody else there because I have a disability. I'll be able to find solutions to that problem that nobody else there can think of because I have a long history of being creative and finding different ways to do things. Of course, many of those solutions, particularly as an athlete with a disability, come about. The solution for them is to develop some form of adaptive equipment. It's a key part of living with a disability, whether it be crutches to walk around in it every day. Now, sure, you can go and buy a pair of crutches. There's independent living stores around the world, and you can go buy a standard pair of crutches. But they don't tend to be made for performance or high-level performance and function. And so even the crutches that I have today have a few adaptations for them. When I buy these, they have a double-walled aluminium shaft, and the whole thing weighs just over 1 kilo. And when you pivot at the shoulder, every gram down here, it's the longest human axis in the body to move. I have to adapt these by getting a mate, and I have worked on a carbon fibre shaft. These come in at about 650 grams now. The carbon flex is a lot nicer than a rigid aluminium shaft. And then I buy the rubber tips and cut about 10 mil of extra rubber on them, pulling about 30 grams out of each of the tips. They still hold on very well because we've adapted the texture on the carbon at the bottom so they grip really well, don't fall off. And that 30 grams, particularly so far away from shoulder, makes every difference. And so I guess I look at a whole pile of different areas of my life and work out a solution to the problem. Another example of adaptive equipment happened when I was in my late teenage years. As a skier and working in my parents' ski shop, we're always looking for things to sell during the summer. And we tended to follow the crazes. We followed the windsurfing craze through the mid-80s, and that died off. We stopped selling windsurfers. And we found the next craze from international contacts was going to be rollerblades. So we bought a whole pile of rollerblades in, and I was going to be on the shop floor selling and fitting rollerblades. As naturally you have to do in that environment, step one was for me to learn how to rollerblade. When our first shipment arrived, I've got my size out of the box, I've put it on, and I've started out the front of the shop to learn how to rollerblade. Luckily for me, the similarities and balance between sliding on a ski and rolling on a rollerblade meant it was pretty quick and easy. And in the first or the second day, the next day, we went rollerblading about 20 kilometres around the lake in Canberra, and it was awesome fun, really enjoyed it. Went out with some mates, had a beer afterwards. All my mates came in to buy rollerblades off me. It was a great situation. But as my mates got better at skating, they also wanted to go into different areas. And so we started playing a game of rollerblade hockey in a school car park on a Sunday afternoon. Now, when I rollerblade, I've got a skate in my foot, I've got my crutches in my hand, and if the two-legged version of rollerblading is actually to push outwards to propel your body forwards, the one-legged version of that is actually really similar to skiing because you push outwards to propel your body forwards. And before you fall over, you turn your skate, bring it back under you, and then you push the other side. And you develop this turning rhythm that develops forward propulsion. Between each turn, there's a push on the crutches behind you, partly to maintain the rhythm, partly for that little bit of extra propulsion. Our first game of hockey, all my mates had been into the shop, bought rollerblade hockey sticks off me, some bought some pads and things like that. And I've approached this game not really sure how I'm going to play rollerblade hockey. And so we've gotten out in the court, and I've worked out the best way for me to play hockey was to basically roll up to the puck, turn my foot sideways, kick it in front of me, and then roll onto the skate again. It was Not the best solution in the world. First of all, it was really hard to control the kick. The bolts on the side of the skate meant that it could come off at funny angles out of my control, and I could only kick it ahead of me and chase it down. And by the time I got there was usually somebody else to fight for it. And so after this first game of rollerblade hockey, I was the worst player on the field. All my mates knew it, I knew it. And we all know what happens to the worst player on the field in many team sports. Somebody eventually goes, "Hey buddy, you're no good, go in goals." And so I got stuck as the goalie, which I wasn't even very good at that either. And while I stood in goals, a little bit fuming that I couldn't be competitive and couldn't compete with my mates, I started to think, how am I going to work out how to play rollerblade hockey? And over the next couple of weeks, the solution for me was to actually develop a new piece of adaptive equipment, a hockey crutch. A crutch just like this one with a hockey stick off the end. I knew that if I just bolted it on, there'd be a couple of problems. It'd make my crutch too long, the tip of the hockey stick would slip, and if I put too much weight on it, I'd snap it really quick and easily. So we developed a system where the stick was there flat on the ground ready to use, but when it had a pivot and spring system. So whenever I wanted to push on the skate, the stick simply folded up out of the way. Step one was to develop that equipment, but then step two was to learn how to use it, to understand what my strengths and weaknesses were. There were things that I couldn't do well, something like a slap shot, getting your whole body and two arms behind the puck and to really hit it, shoot it hard at goal. You couldn't develop the same torque out of one arm. But there are also things that I could do with my stick format that you couldn't do with a normal hockey stick in two hands. My favourite move was always coming out of left defence where I played. You'd be coming up the left wing, stick handling to left and right as your skate turns for that forward propulsion. As you come up, the defender's coming towards you. You bring the front out, stick out in front of you, and you lean over on your left. Make it look like you're going to try and take them around the outside. They make their fatal mistake looking at the puck instead of going for the man and the body, because you then bounce off that crutch, bring the puck around behind your foot, which is something that's really hard to do with two hands on a stick, flick it out and go right. Fools those two-legged suckers every time. I think in many ways, being successful at life or in any endeavour in life, the first step in doing it is belief, believing that you can achieve your goals. We talked earlier that I used to close my eyes and dream about going skiing with one leg after I watched the video. And there are many parallels between a child's dream and an adult's goal. They're both things we want to achieve in the future. As kids, we dream about many things. Our imaginations goes wild, and many of them we never expect to fulfill. As adults, we change the name from dream to goal because we want to make it realistic. We formalise our goal-setting processes by trying to make our goals challenging yet realistic. We give them a time frame. We make sure they're measurable. We might even schedule a reward for when we achieve the goal. But in the end, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a child's dream or an adult's goal. They still have a tremendous ability to inspire us, a tremendous ability to attract others towards that goal and achieving that goal. If other people think it's going to be a worthwhile endeavour, they're going to put their time and energy in, even as an individual athlete, to help support you to achieve that goal. Children never expect to achieve their goal, and my dream was to learn how to ski, and I was one of the lucky ones, I guess, who achieved a dream. But the power of setting goals, of achieving them, of motivating yourself, of really, to me, it's the best way to stretch yourself, to challenge yourself. And what I've learnt through my life is that the most rewarding things in life are not the easy ones. If we look and go through life looking for the easiest way, then we really won't achieve very much at all. It's only when we look at life as a challenge, look at challenges of how we can achieve them, that we can really get towards something special and achieve something that many other people won't get to. One of my biggest challenges in life that I set myself was to reinvent myself. I was a ski racer. I'd been to 4 Winter Paralympic Games. Now, ski racing's all about, it's a bit like a Formula One car of skiing. The person who wins a ski race is the person who can go around a corner the fastest. And I decided to transform myself from a Formula One car to a drag racer. And just like those 2 cars look totally different in terms of aerodynamics, wheel size, grip, engine, etc., etc. The actual difference in equipment for a skier to go around a corner versus a skier to go in a straight line down a hill as fast as possible is totally different. And it's a totally different type of athlete. As human beings, we tend to compete in a range of different sports. Some sports are won by the athlete or team who are the fittest and strongest. Usually anything with a race in its name, and I'm hoping this goes for horses as well. If you've got a horse race, it's usually the athlete or the team that is the fittest and strongest who will win that race. There's a second group of sports that are usually won by the athlete or team with the best technique or the highest skill level. I'm assuming dressage kind of falls into this category, as does many other sports. Ski racing is a good example in my mind. There are lots of sports that are won with the best technique. Speed skiing, though, falls into a small third category. The best speed skier in the world is not the one who's fittest and strongest, nor are they even the one with the best technique. The best speed skier in the world is the one who can stand at the top of the mountain. It's about 2 kilometres long. You're standing on a slope that's just on 70 degrees in gradient. Who can look down this track, see the people just on 2 kilometres away who look like ants walking around down the bottom, and have the mental discipline and control to acknowledge their fear, to say, what I'm doing is scary. What I'm doing has risks. But to be able to take that fear, put it into a back of your mind, throw in a box, throw half a dozen padlocks on that box to control the fear and still be able to throw yourself off this cliff face into an unstable aerodynamic position to go as fast as possible. The best ski racer in the world is the one who has the best mental discipline. Right now, what I want to try and do is share with you what it's like to ski down a mountain at over 200 kilometres an hour. It's the best way I know how. To do this, I'm going to need your help. I'm going to need your imagination, because there is no big snow-covered mountains outside, and I'm relatively confident that we don't have the right skill set in the room to make it happen. The very first thing I need you to imagine doing is getting dressed into a shiny red rubber suit. It's a suit that takes about 45 minutes and 2 people to squeeze into. It's a suit that's red, because we all know that's the fastest colour. Mr. Ferrari tells us that. But it's rubber because the fabric does not breathe. You see, when you're skiing down a mountain at over 200 kilometres an hour, the wind pressure pushing through the fabric means that anytime you've got a fabric that's breathable, it's going to go inside the fabric, blow it up, and then it starts to flap, which is terrible for aerodynamics. So we need to wear a fabric that doesn't breathe, doesn't let any air in or out. It makes it the most uncomfortable thing you'll ever wear, because your skin's reaction to not breathing is to sweat. And it doesn't matter if you're hot or you're cold, you're sweating in this thing. And when you combine that with the little superstition that most speed skiers have, myself included, that if you wash your suit, it slows it down, also makes this one of the most horrible things you can ever wear. When you pull it up to your waist, you're simply grabbing the suit over your thighs. It's pretty kind of rubbery, sticky, so you can just pull it up, front and back, side and side, get it up over your hips. And after about 20 minutes work, it's at your hips. and you get a chance to stand there and breathe with sweat dripping off your front from the work of stretching this thing over your body. To get it up over your shoulders, you actually just stand there with somebody holding it and basically drop your body weight into it to stretch it up over your shoulders. You have behind your calves and inside of the suit a 30 centimetre long foam block that takes your calves and tapers it back to a point to reduce aerodynamic drag behind your legs. And of course, on your head you have a helmet that serves two purposes. The primary purpose, the most important one, is to turn your head into a more aerodynamic shape. Unfortunately, this contradicts with its secondary purpose, which is to protect your head in case of a crash. Whereas your average push bike helmet has nearly 5 centimetres of crush zone. So if you run head first into a brick wall, it will crush, decelerate your head in a more gradual manner and protect your brain. Unfortunately, because of the aerodynamic requirements, a speed ski helmet has less than 1 centimetre from your scalp to the fiberglass above it. To ski really, really fast, you obviously need a really big, steep hill. And the fastest track in the world is in a place called Les Arcs in France. You stand at the top on the 70-degree slope. In front of you is the starter, French guy. He's there, he's got ice crampons on his feet to allow him to stand there, and he's actually got a climbing harness and he's anchored to the hill just in case he slips over so he doesn't slide very far. You push out towards him on this narrow little shoveled out track in the snow so you can actually stand there. And as you get to him, there's no point in talking to him, partly because my French is horrible, but partly also because one of the things your helmet does is insulate your ears. By cutting off your hearing, it helps to trick your brain into thinking you're not going as fast as you actually are. It also cuts off your vision and only allows you to see directly in front of you in this channel. Because one of the ways our brains experience speed is through our peripheral vision and how fast thing goes past it. And by cutting that off, again, you're helping to trick your brain into thinking you're not going as fast as you actually are. When the starter's there, he has his hand up, meaning the track's not ready yet. And as soon as he puts his hand down, you have 30 seconds to start. You take a couple of deep breaths. You've got a little tube on your helmet you purse your lips onto when you exhale, which takes the air around and puts it out the back so you don't fog the lens. Sounds like Darth Vader when you're breathing in a speed ski helmet. You look down the mountain, pick the line that you want to ski, take your deep breaths, and then you jump from facing sideways in the hill to facing down the hill and crouch into an aerodynamic tuck position. Just on 3.2 seconds later, you're doing 100 kilometres an hour. That's why it's fun. I don't know what speed a horse does 0 to 100 kilometres an hour in, but in Australia, we watch a V8 supercars. It's a sport touring car series, and a V8 supercar will do 0 to 100 in just under 4 seconds. So if you imagine yourself in the passenger seat of a V8 supercar, with a racing car driver at the wheel, they rev the engine, drop the clutch, and you feel the car accelerate out from under you. You feel the front of your neck tense to hold your head up. You feel the seat almost compress under you as it wants to push itself out. If you imagine all of those sensations, increase the speed by about 20%, and then take away things like the airbag, the chassis, the windscreen, important parts of the car, then you have some idea of how much fun it really is. You continue to hold your aerodynamic tuck position and continue to accelerate down the mountain. As you go past 180 odd kilometres an hour, you start to feel the power of the wind, the way it buffets your body backwards and forwards. You look ahead and you see 2 red lines drawn in dye in the snow. They're exactly 100 metres apart and they correspond to 2 timing beams across the track. That's how our sport is measured. Not by a fancy radar gun or anything like that, simply your time over 100 metres. Therefore, your average speed is easy to calculate. At 200 kilometres an hour, you'll cross 100 metres, length of a soccer pitch, in 1.8 seconds. Faster than 200 kilometres an hour, less than 1.8 seconds. As you come to the first of those 2 red lines, you grit your teeth knowing this is the roughest, the bumpiest, the fastest part of the track. And one of the most interesting parts about speed skiing for me is what happens in your own mind. You see, as your body accelerates, your mind accelerates as well. It tries to keep up with the environment that you've placed it in. And you actually find yourself, as bizarre as this sounds, you're smarter when you're skiing at 200 kilometres an hour than when you're sitting here, because you're in an environment where you've got to think faster. And you find yourself flicking through thoughts very quickly, almost analysing a conversation you had the day before you chastise yourself and try and focus on the task at hand. But before you know it, you cross the second of those two red lines, and your mind immediately starts to evaluate your run. How straight you're able to ski, the aerodynamic position you're able to hold, how fast you think you went. Unfortunately, as your mind is racing through this, you're still skiing at over 200 kilometres an hour, and you still have to stop. There is no brake pedal on a ski. Stopping is a relatively simple process of going from your tight, low aerodynamic track position, leaning as far forward into the air as you can, and slowly and gently standing up. As you do, the wind hits you in the chest and tries to throw you over backwards. It's actually at this moment, for the very first time during your entire run, that you come to a full and complete understanding of how fast you're actually going. When you're down low, cutting through the air, accelerating, you don't feel it. But when you stand up to slow down, you go, wow, I'm going really, really fast. As you come down under about 140 kilometres an hour, you start throwing some big sweeping turns in. You look ahead and the fence is starting to come for you a lot quicker than you'd like to. You start digging that edge in, trying to slow down a little bit quicker. And as you come to a complete stop, you finally get a chance to look up at the scoreboard. Read your results. My goal on my last speed skiing run was to become Australia's fastest ever skier, a mark that was held by a mate of mine, Nick, at 212.26 kilometres an hour. And when you look up and you read 213.65. It's the combination of the physical, the endorphins, the adrenaline flowing through the system after scaring the wits out of yourself on the hill behind you. But when you combine that with the mental, only you know the risks you've taken, only you know the hard work that you've gone to get to this moment, and only you fully experience the power of emotion that comes with achieving a goal that you put so much into. It's a moment that's almost matched nearly an hour later as you come down off that physical high and your hands are still enough to actually get your phone out and write a text message. Sorry, Nick, I just broke your record. Speed skiing's a great teacher because it teaches you so much about yourself in a high-pressure environment. It's a dangerous environment. I've had 2 friends die on that track. And when you put yourself and challenge yourself in that way, you also learn about yourself. Learn about what your mind does in a real pressure situation. Learn truly about who you are, but also learn for next time. What do I need to do to be able to control my mind? Whether it be the warm-up process, keeping yourself busy, adapting to things going wrong. Somebody in front of you crashes and you might be standing up there for an extra half an hour. I've been in all of those environments and it teaches you to adapt, teaches you to be tough, teaches you to be resilient. I think in some ways having disability teaches you all of those things as well. Because particularly living in a first world Western country, our culture, our environment tends to breed soft people. We have a beautiful, comfortable bed to sleep in every night. We have running hot and cold water. We have electricity. We have all of these things at hand. And sometimes when you go and do something like walk the Kokoda track and live in a tent for a week and push yourself physically all day, every day, and not have a shower at the end of it, have to then back up with cooking your own dinner. All of these things in that tougher environment. Third world countries breed tough people. And I think sometimes it's really good for all of us to experience going places with no mobile reception, going places without electricity, running water, comfortable beds, to help teach us how good we've got it, but also teach us how to be resilient and tough and adaptable to different environments, particularly when things go wrong. So, my watch is just going funky. We have a couple of spare minutes before I come back and do some conclusions. Does anybody at all have any questions they'd like to ask about absolutely anything I've spoken today, except the unique sexual positions, because we're not going into that? Tim's running over to get a microphone for you, but I'm very happy in this environment if you just want to stand up and talk loudly.
I wanted to ask the question as to whether you've had many injuries while you've actually been skiing and how you've dealt with those things.
I think the worst injury I've ever had was I'd been out for a training ride, bike ride on the road, and on the way home after I'd stopped for coffee and everything, I rode straight into the back of a broken down garbage truck. I think I was accelerating away from a set of lights. My bike computer says I was doing about 30 kilometres an hour and I stopped dead. And I was really lucky in some ways because my bike went under the truck, so my bike wasn't damaged. And it was my head and shoulder that really copped the damage. And the injuries were, I think there was 12 fractures. There was 6 ribs, 5 vertebrae and a collarbone and a scapula, a shoulder blade. That was one of my bad injuries, it was I think about a week in hospital and then about another 8 weeks not doing too much. One of the bad parts about injury for me is that you guys have all got spare limbs. If one goes down, you've still got 3, and 3 is the critical number. If I have one go down, then I've got 2. And whether it be 2 arms or a leg or an arm, it does make things a little bit harder. And, certainly from a skiing perspective, there's a number of injuries. I've never broken a bone skiing and probably never really had more than about 8 weeks out from a skiing injury. Had a few back problems and a couple of acute back injuries from crashes. Had some knee issues, but never major surgery or anything like that. So in some ways, either I was lucky or I was skillful. I like to believe it was pure skill. There's always injuries there. There are always niggles. I've dislocated a left shoulder when I was young in training, put it straight through the middle of a ski racing gate, which then ripped it out backwards. There's lots of those sorts of things. And I guess it's one of the keys, and particularly I've always had a balance in my life with a physical element to it. And I have to admit that when that physical element gets taken away from me, I struggle. I struggle mentally, I struggle physically, I struggle in many ways because it really takes my life out of balance. And that's something that I don't think I'm particularly good. I'm certainly not a good patient. I know that. My wife and my mother and my kids all tell me that when I'm sick or when I'm injured, I'm, man flu kind of syndrome. It's always the end of the world. But I think, injuries are just a part of sport. And you've got to accept that, and particularly when you're doing high-risk sports like I tend to choose. They tend to be the high adrenaline, high-risk kind of links, So there's certainly a few there. Another question in the middle. Somebody else had their hand up? Okay. Yes.
I'm just going to bring the mic because we're actually recording, so then we get
Oh,
both
okay.
sides
Yeah,
of it.
cool. Okay, well, let's get it on
That's why I'm
recording
putting
then.
it on that.
It's not that good a question, really, but do you choose to use a prosthetic limb or the crutches, or what do you use and why?
Okay, so the first answer to this goes back to my everyday Harry Potter jokes. When I'm on the shop floor in my Harry Potter shop in Canberra, I play a character. Of course, having one leg, named Michael, and owning a Harry Potter shop combine to make me a character, and I call myself Nearly Legless Mick. If you know something about Harry Potter, you get it. If you don't, there's a character in Harry Potter books. His name is Nearly Headless Nick. He's played by John Cleese in the movies, and he's a ghost. Unfortunately, the executioner didn't sharpen the axe enough, so he only got most of the way through. So he's only nearly headless. And he can't go in the headless hunt with all his friends, which he's very frustrated about. And so I play a character, Nearly Legless Mick. And when the kids ask, nearly legless, why are you nearly legless? Then the answer would be that I nearly lost my whole leg and there's a bit left. And then I tell the kids that I lost my leg to an expelliarmus curse. But anyway, let's get away from my Harry Potter jokes because this is not the right audience. That's okay. As you can see, I have a stump, but my stump is relatively short. When I was young, I learnt to use a prosthetic. It's a pretty tough thing. And a leg, during my early teenage years, 13, 14, 15-ish, I'd go to school with my leg on, and it'd be on all day, and it'd work relatively well. I do remember crashing my bike on the way to school once and rocking up to school with my foot on backwards. All those sorts of funny stories. I went to the woodwork shop and we found some Allen keys and turned it around, and then I had to go to the prosthetist next day to fix it properly and get the alignment right and all of that. But as I grew, my stump didn't grow anymore, and it had to carry an increasingly longer, heavier leg. And a combination of that started to be not so much an all-day deal for me, and organising your day around wearing a leg for the first half or the second half and then having crutches and carrying those sorts of things, crutches tended to be better for me. The other side of wearing a leg was that when I was overseas skiing, I'd find myself after being overseas for 4 months with this leg that I've carried everywhere. It's a pain in the neck. I don't like wearing it. It's uncomfortable in planes and things. And I'd worn it 3 times in 4 months. And then I stopped taking it overseas. And it's not the sort of thing you can just put down and not use and pick up and use again. The muscles, the toughness of the skin, the technique, all of those things need pretty constant practice. So for me, I've got a leg at home. I do use it occasionally. I'd like to say I put it on once every 6 months to keep being able to use it, but I don't remember putting it on in the last year and a half. I guess also there's a certain expectation about a prosthetic leg, particularly in an able-bodied community. Everybody has 2 legs, and there's certain pressures there to either look normal, which is not me. I'm definitely not about looking normal, but also that it works like it should. It's got an ankle and a knee, and it should work better. In reality, though, I'm slow on my leg, it's painful, and I can't wear it all day. So I'm not a big fan. And I think also there's a certain limitation that other people put on what you can do with crutches. Most people's experiences, them or somebody they know who've broken their leg and used crutches for 6 or 8 weeks and not developed the technique, the equipment, or the physical side to actually use crutches to their max. And they tend to use disabled parking and minimise their crutch use rather than try and learn those sort of things. And that's a very natural thing, but from that comes an expectation of what you can do on crutches. And if most people's expectation of what you can do is at this level, mine's up here, reality is somewhere in the middle. I'd like to think closer to mine than yours. But I think for me, crutches work well. I'm highly developed physically to use them, structurally and technically. I'm highly developed to use them, and they work well for me at the moment. Certainly at the end of a 50k run or something like that, your wrists are painful and there's blisters and lots of issues. But again, they're challenges that I like to choose to bring in. And it's an interesting kind of segue from this into one of the points I had in my notes that I missed today, that I think one of the key learnings for me, particularly as an athlete with a disability, is to not accept the culture you get given. Culture dictates so many of our own ideas, so many of the limitations that we put on ourselves. And even to a certain extent, the way we do things are all influenced and dictated by our culture and other people around us. And if there's anything I've learnt through my life, particularly with me being an expert in one-leggedness, a world expert, I am pretty much ignore what other people tell me. Certainly when it comes to what my abilities and what I can or can't do. I remember sitting down having a conversation one day with our ski team. Paralympic ski team, some amazing athletes, some great coaches, some great staff. We were sitting there at dinner one day and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to walk the Kokoda track this summer. And the expert there was the only person who'd actually walked the Kokoda track. It was one of our staff members, our ski technician, and he went, oh, I think that'd be really tough or probably even impossible to do with one leg. which of course is a red rag to a bull for me. And so being able to ignore, because he's not a world expert in one-leggedness, being able to ignore what he thinks I can do, in the end, it's about my own self-belief. And being able to challenge yourself, being able to set a goal, to me, is about, one, believing you can achieve it. There's no way you're going everywhere if you set a goal and you don't think you can do it. Certainly your goal-setting process needs to set goals that are going to challenge you, but be realistic as well. And the more at the challenging end, the harder you have to work for them. And that's why I like to set really challenging goals. It's also about approaching that goal with a problem-solving mentality. Being able to approach that goal and be open-minded enough to have different ideas yourself, accept different ideas from other people in the group around you. And for me, the third point to achieve any goal is simply about hard work. You cannot replace the time, the energy, the effort to put in place that goal. And the longer, certainly around elite sport, obviously we've got a 4-year cycle of Olympic and Paralympic Games, the longer you've got to achieve that goal is not, some of it's about problem-solving time, but a lot of it's about extra hard work time. If you're 3 years out of the game, gives you more time to do the hard work. And that's an important part of it. We do have one more question before we finish up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask quickly about, you've spoken a lot of overcoming your goals or overcoming challenges to meet your goals and so on. What have been some challenges where you haven't been able to achieve your goals, and how have you coped mentally and refreshed yourself for the next challenge?
Yep. I think in many ways, the first example I'm going to give of that, I was at a speed ski track trying to set a world record once. And I'd spent a lot of money on that season speed skiing. I had a documentary crew that I was paying for with me in France. And it all came down to the last chance on the last day to set this world record. And I'm standing at the top of the hill and everything's prepped and I'm fully confident and everything's going right. And the skier that went in front of me was actually 2 skiers. It was a tandem pair. And they set a world record of 196 kilometres an hour for 2 people on a pair of skis, which is amazing. However, in the stopping phase after they've set their record, they crashed. And when you have 2 guys on one pair of skis, basically they're tucked behind each other. One guy's head is very close to the other guy's backside. And they've crashed. And it was nearly a 1-hour delay for me in the start, prepped, ready to go. And in that hour, some clouds started drifting in, some light snow started falling, and I was all prepped to ski at 200 kilometres an hour for the first time. And mentally, you come down off that ready to go high, you bring yourself down a little bit, you kind of have this level because you're not sure how long it's going to take. And then as it appears that the course is ready to go and you're starting to look like you get the all clear, you get about 5 minutes notice and you try and get yourself to that mental spot again, and it's impossible to get it right. You can be too excited where you're jumping out of your skin and scatterbrained. You can be not excited enough, but getting that right level is really hard for a second peak. And I did everything I could. I used lots of my experience. I was pretty happy with my performance. And I skied down the mountain and skied 198 kilometres an hour. It was my last chance of the season to set an official world record. It has to be done in competition. This was the last high-speed competition of the season, so my chance was over. So we made a documentary about not skiing at 200 kilometres an hour. And I'd put a lot of resources in. I came home. I was making a living as a public speaking, so I'd literally done 50 or 60 corporate speaking gigs talking about not skiing at 200 kilometres an hour, and was very frustrated, and went back the next season, got to France, highly motivated, highly disciplined, really everything, and went and skied at 210.4 kilometres an hour and smashed the 200k mark for the first time. And to me, I look at that as a positive, as a learning example, but also, you know, without that setback, I don't think I would have been as good as I was the year after. So one, having a setback can be looked at in a certain way as a positive, as a learning experience, so that when you go back and you get another chance, assuming you do, certainly in an Olympic cycle, if something goes wrong like that in Olympic Games, you've got to wait 4 years, and that'll make you even fired up even more to get it right the next time. It's a learning experience. And I guess for me, I don't have a good example where I haven't had a chance to go and get it right and do it again. Sure, there's a couple of events at Paralympic Games, and I remember at the downhill in '94 sitting pretty much trying to hide and get away from anybody who knew me or anybody, and I wound up under the stands to get away from people, to be able to reflect on the mistakes that I'd made that day. And you don't get those chances again. Sure, you can go back 4 years later and get it right, but sometimes you can't get another chance. And, that's why we have major events, so that you get one chance at it sometimes, and you have to get it right. And it's a bit like speed skiing in some ways. As a recreational skier, I reckon during training I probably crash every second day. You're pushing the limits. Speed skiing, you just can't afford to put yourself in an environment where you might crash. And in some ways at a major event, you can't put yourself in an environment. You've got to do everything possible because you can't get another chance at it. So yeah, I think I've answered that a bit, but maybe not that well. A bit of rambling there. I'm going to stop rambling because it's the end of a long day for you. I'd like to firstly thank Willinga Park for inviting me here to speak to you. I hope that a different perspective from another sport gives you some material for thinking about in terms of your own sporting journey, to be able to change the way you think about what you do and look at things with that problem-solving attitude. I'd like to thank you for laughing at the appropriate moments during some of my silly jokes. And I'd also like to mention, I think we're going for drinks now and I'll be there. So if anybody has any more questions, one-on-one chats, please feel free to come and say hello. And thank you very much.